With the success of Splatoon and Splatoon 2, the Splatoon series has pretty firmly established itself as one of Nintendo's most important games. And with the final Splatfest coming in just a few weeks, it looks like Splatoon 2's support is finally coming to an end.
But Redkwan, you don't have the online service, so you haven't played Splatoon 2 in like a year.
Shh, Brian, I can't have you making me look bad. I just lost like 90% of Splatoon fans. So I might be a little out of the loop here on what's happening with Splatfest and updates and whatnot within the past year, and I was never all that great at the game to begin with, as you can see from the gameplay where I don't use subs or specials ever. But of course, you wouldn't have to know all this if I didn't have an intern who's a real loose slips. But I did play a decent amount of Splatoon 2 when it first came out, and I played the original on the Wii U quite a lot. So while I might not know all the details about the Splatoon series, I at least sort of know partially what it is. And I have very low standards, so I'm totally putting this video out anyway. But with Splatoon 2 wrapping up in a way, it leaves the question of what comes next. Sure, there will be a new story, and it would only make sense that they'll add in some new competitive modes, but is that it? Will Splatoon 3 be another Splatoon sequel that makes improvements but doesn't add anything that drastically changes up what we think of Splatoon as being? Are the changes that fans want really realistic, or will Splatoon 3 be largely the same? Hello all 1,730 of you, I'm Redkwan, and what can Splatoon 3 change? So let's first take a look at Splatoon vs Splatoon 2. I don't know enough about the stories and lore of the games to say anything about what Splatoon 3 will have in that department. I know a lot of people want interesting combinations of things for the singers, and that seems pretty possible to me, but I'm gonna stay away from that kind of thing here, because I'm clueless. And there goes the other 10%. Simmer down, Brian, simmer down. But in terms of gameplay, Splatoon and Splatoon 2 are pretty similar. Sure, there are some different weapons, the maps are set up a little differently, and the balancing is changed, but the larger idea and the game modes are pretty much the same. The exceptions would be Clam Blitz, which I don't have much experience with, but from the looks of it, is almost as lame as Splat Zones, and Salmon Run, which is interesting and different, and is one of the modes I had the most fun with in the game. So Splatoon 2 changed up some stuff and added some new modes, which made the game feel a little different, but most of the aspects that realistically could have been added or fleshed out more, like the story mode and the lack of inclusion of some offline battle modes, carried over from the original game. So if Splatoon 2 didn't change a whole lot about the main aspect of the game from the original Splatoon, does that mean that we shouldn't expect anything big to change in Splatoon 3? Well, not necessarily. Sure, there are some things that will obviously carry over, and I don't think changing things like the base concept for the game or how the modes work is a very good idea anyway. I think it should still feel like Splatoon, and I think it will. But there are a couple main factors that keep Splatoon 2 from changing more than it did. For one, Splatoon 2 came out just 2 years after Splatoon did, and that isn't a super long development stretch for games anymore. Splatoon games do add updates and such later on, so they probably didn't need quite as long an initial development, but still, that's not super long. And I think to get a big game like Splatoon 2 early in the Switch's life, Nintendo had to use a lot of the ideas from Splatoon 1. The same modes returned with a couple additions, some weapons and specials carried over, and the single player was set up in largely the same way. That's not to say it wasn't good or that it wasn't a full sequel, please don't kill me, Alf, but I think Splatoon 2 was a little restricted by the time frame. So if Splatoon 3 is in no rush to happen, which I'd guess is true because I can't think of a reason there would be a huge rush, it won't be restricted in how much can change. There are a lot of possibilities, but the question is, what stuff actually has the ability to change? Besides adding in new competitive modes, what can the series really do to change stuff up? Well, there are a few areas of the game that I think have a lot of ways in which they can improve, so I'll talk a little about each of them and whether I think Splatoon 3 realistically could change them. So let's start with local play and offline battles. This seems to be one of the most wanted features in a Splatoon 3, and if it isn't, then well, it's the one I want the most, so it's important, alright? Obviously, without having the Switch Online service, Splatoon 2 is basically useless for me now. I beat the story mode, and now I can give up, I guess? I suppose I could just stop being a cheapskate and get Nintendo Switch Online, but at this point, I'd rather just pretend I haven't gotten it for some noble reason, like that I'll refuse to buy a service that isn't any better than their past online services. That's what I'll go with. So for me, local play and offline play with bots would be awesome. Also, modes like this can help give a game a much longer life, instead of just becoming worthless once Nintendo stops supporting it. They work better for on-the-go play, and it's just more fun to play games against people locally than online. Is there much of a chance of this happening? Honestly, probably not. Some people think it just logistically wouldn't work because of lack of power of the Switch, or because 8-player split screen would be horrendous, but I think Nintendo could make it work, maybe shrinking down the map size and making it a 2v2 thing, especially when the original game on the Wii U had that Balloon Dojo thing. You guys forget that existed? Well, good, because it was pretty bad. So I think it would probably be feasible in Splatoon 3. But can it happen? I really kinda doubt it. I think Splatoon is a game that people buy the online service over, and if Nintendo added an offline mode in it that was comparable, I think that could stop some people from buying the online service. If you can play Splatoon offline, some people might not feel the need to buy Switch Online. Even if that's only a small percentage of people, Nintendo's shown they don't need to add in a mode like this for Splatoon to succeed, so why would they take the extra time to add in a mode that not many people would be buying the game for, only for those people to now possibly opt out of their online service? It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Sadly, I think a mode like this that lets you do fully fledged offline battles, while it would be great, probably isn't all that likely. Another thing that could be a big area for growth is adding in more modes like Salmon Run and revamping Splatfests. I'm sure Splatoon 3 will add in more competitive modes, which is fine and all, but there are already quite a few, and I don't know how exciting a new one will really be. But Salmon Run was a fantastic new mode that's very different from everything else in the game. Adding in more weird, untraditional modes like that could make Splatoon 3 way crazier, way more fun, and way more varied than the other Splatoon games before it. Similarly, Splatfests are fun, but I do feel like they could use a change in their formula. Correct me if this has changed since the Switch Online service came into effect, but all Splatfests seem to be the same thing every time. Why not have a 3 or 4 team Splatfest, or have Splatfests where each team has slightly altered balancing to make things go a little off the rails? Those are probably terrible ideas, but you get the point. Adding more weird modes like Salmon Run to mix things up, and changing the Splatfest dynamics could be ways to make Splatoon 3 a lot better and more exciting. So can these things change? Well, I think more modes like Salmon Run, considering its success, are pretty likely. But I kinda doubt they'll change up Splatfests all that much. It might make them unfair or just less fun, and I don't know if Nintendo would want to risk that. And finally, what about a bigger, better story? Splatoon's story modes are fun, but they aren't as big of a focus as the other modes in the game are, and to me at least, they don't feel quite fully developed. I think making Splatoon's missions more exciting and interesting in the main stories could make the games a lot more fleshed out and interesting, and this is one thing I think has a great shot of being better going forward. The Acto expansion shows that Nintendo is putting more of a focus into the story side of Splatoon, so I think a revamped story mode in Splatoon 3 would make a lot of sense.
Redkwan, you haven't even played the Acto expansion.
Brian, you really didn't need to go there. Seriously though, how'd this video get greenlit? So what can Splatoon 3 change? Well, I think there are a number of things that Splatoon 3 can do to be a lot better than its predecessors. Adding an offline mode, making more wacky side modes, and having a better story. And while I doubt an offline mode will happen because it's extra work for almost nothing in return, and in reality it may be a negative effect, I think more weird modes and a much deeper story are things that can definitely happen, and may be likely to happen. Splatoon 3 has a lot more time than Splatoon 2 did, so hopefully we'll see a lot of the features and improvements fans have been wanting for the game. And hopefully I'll be able to play it so I can talk about it without feeling like a sham. Well, I'm Redkwan. What do you think Splatoon 3 will change, and what do you want to see changed? I just realized that I finally have an excuse for reusing footage for a year. Ha! Now you can't completely blame me for having low quality. The root cause is still me, of course, but it really comes down to me standing up for what I believe in and not getting the online service based on principles and values. But mostly money. Anyways, I'm Redkwan, thank you all for watching, and I'll hopefully see you all later. Goodbye.